Happy Friday, everyone. Welcome. We're just giving it a moment or two for individuals to get settled into our virtual learning space. We are always so excited when you all show up during this hour. It lets us know that you really do value the content we share through Intentional Conversations VodCast, and we're so grateful for that. If you would, take a moment to go to the chat and let us know where you are joining the conversation from today. That is always a treat for us. For those who I have not had the pleasure of interacting with, I am Dr. Nika White. My pronouns are she, her. I am the proud founder and lead principal consultant for NWC, and we are so grateful to be sharing the space and time with each of you. So we're building up critical mass. So as folks are continuing to join, whether it's through our Zoom community or even on LinkedIn Live, I always like to make sure I shout out the LinkedIn Live individuals. You are not forgotten about. There are many of you that join us by LinkedIn. And as we engage in dialogue today and you listen in, if something is said that you want to respond to, go to the comment section. We're bringing all of those sentiments into our Zoom chat so that we can be connected and as proximate to each other as possible. I'm seeing that Columbus is represented today. Fantastic. If you also feel inclined to share your LinkedIn information into the chat, that lets us know that you are willing to connect with members of this community even beyond this hour. And we know that that is of great value. I will also ask my team to drop my LinkedIn information into the chat because I am always willing and excited to connect with new individuals that are just as passionate about the work of equity and inclusion and belonging as I am. And so because you're here today, I know that's part of your story as well. I want you to know that here at NWC, we really do value disability inclusion. One of the ways in which we show up in that regard is by ensuring that we have closed caption that's enabled for our Intentional Conversations podcast. And so I want you to know that that is available to you. If you're here on LinkedIn, then again, welcome. If you're here in Zoom, I want you to know that cameras are always encouraged and we love to see smiling faces, but we also know that many of you could be joining us while you're multitasking, or maybe you're just listening in. And in whatever capacity that you are here with us today, we are so grateful and we know that you're going to enjoy today's show. As a way to extend our sense of community, I do invite you to make sure you're using the comment section of LinkedIn Live, if that's how you're joined today, or the chat within Zoom. This is our way to learn with and from each other. So if something is said that resonates with you, then drop those emojis, those reactions, or your statements. If there's a resource that comes to mind that you know would be of value to this greater community, then drop it into the chat. We want to make sure that we are identifying all ways for us to be able to contribute to today's experience. So once again, Dr. Nika White, you have joined Intentional Conversations VodCast, where we intersect dialogue of diversity, equity, inclusion, belonging, all the things with leadership and business. Enjoy the show. Let the conversations begin, indeed, and that is precisely what we are about to do. So you have joined Intentional Conversations VodCast. We're going to jump right in. For those of you who are aware and you've been joining us in the past, you know that we love to take a moment at the top of the hour just to share some information with you that we think is relevant and that we want to be on your radar as it relates to offerings from NWC. So I'm going to take a moment to do that quickly. We're in the month of August still, and August is National Black Business Month. And so I always like to amplify that, especially as a Black woman founder. It's really important for us to support Black-owned businesses. So find ways to do that. A rising tide lifts all boats. And so make sure that you are finding ways to support Black businesses. I also want you to know that August is National Black Philanthropy Month. And so as it relates to Black philanthropy, my husband and I have a foundation, the Carlo and Nika White Foundation, and we're doing a special event on August 27th called An Ode to Black Philanthropy. My team will drop into the comment section and into the chat a link to the event page on our website that gives you more information about it. But it is a way for us to really just align with how in which we're showing up to empower Black communities through our philanthropic efforts. And so I want you to be be aware of that. And I also want you to maybe consider donating to our silent auction or making a contribution to our foundation if you feel so inclined. So we'll share that information into the chat. Next, really exciting news. I am asking for your support. I'm asking for your vote for my panel picker as part of the South by Southwest. And so this is a community voting period. It actually ends on the 18th. But one of the ways in which they like to ensure the content is very relevant to all of those who are in attendance at this well-known conference is by community voting. What conversations and topics do you want to hear? I am a part of a panel of two other individuals that are part of Omnicom, and we're going to be talking about how the DEIs have something to say. And yes, it's a little bit of a play on some words probably all of us have heard recently related to our VP. But I will tell you that if you're part of this community, you know that the DEIs have something to say, and we are standing DEI proud. So I hope that you will vote for me. We will share that link into the chat, and I appreciate your votes. Get us on that stage. So thank you so much in advance for your support. Now, LinkedIn Learning is a great way for many people to extend their knowledge, their understanding, and to deepen their professional development. I have been an instructor for LinkedIn now for a couple years, and I have 3 courses that are out there. So thank you to the 30,000+ learners that have taken my courses. I have another course number 4, that's going to be launching any day now. I know I've been teasing it, but I'm going to continue to tease it until it officially launches. And what I'll say about it is that the content in this course could not be any more important at this day and time. When we think about the level of civility that we need to remind ourselves of in the workplaces, in all spaces where we have influence and show up, especially during this high stakes election season, we need to be guarding ourselves for how do we navigate hate speech in the workplace? How do we address when we know something is said that is harmful? So this course is all about that. And I hope that you will lean in, that you will take it, and you will recommend it to others in your network that you feel would gain value from that course. So thank you in advance. If you've been enjoying Intentional Conversations VodCast, and you know of others that would gain value from the content that we share, but perhaps they aren't able to make this window of time to join us live, there are other ways they could get this content. We do share all of our video replays on our YouTube channel, and so you can certainly direct them to that. But also, some people like to get their content on the go in a podcast capacity. So you can let them know not to worry, because Intentional Conversations is also available on different podcast platforms, as you see there on your screen. And so we hope that this helps us to extend our reach of those who may be interested in connecting with this community. Now, at this point, before I give a formal introduction of today's guest co-host, I often like to let you know what to look forward to in the upcoming weeks and the month for Intentional Conversations by way of introducing some of our guest co-hosts. I am super excited because on August 23rd, next Friday, we're going to be welcoming Suzanne Marviga. And in that conversation, we're going to be talking about how companies can maximize their profits, why psychology is important to reaching your profit goals, and tax strategies implemented by high net worth entrepreneurs that also can work for the rest of us. She is really inclined to spend her passion or her time or her talents helping to educate around building wealth, particularly within the minority communities. And so I look forward to that conversation. And then rounding us out at the end of the month, Shamina Abji is going to be joining us. And in that Intentional Conversations VodCast, we're going to discuss how to intentionally, my favorite word, define short and long-term success means, preventing bias from impacting your performance, 4 types of relationships to help you emerge as a leader, and ways women of color can overcome self-imposed imposter syndrome. I often refer to imposter syndrome as a misdiagnosis, and I know that's also the position that Samina is going to be coming from as well. So join us at the end of the month for that conversation. Now, it does me great pleasure, such great pleasure, to introduce today's guest co-host. This is the first official time that I am meeting with our guest co-host. We had an opportunity to chat before the top of the hour when we were joined with each of you, but we have been supporting each other's content and really admiring each other from afar. And so this is such a treat for me today to have her as part of our community. So as per usual, I want people to know the accolades, the credentials, the experiences in which our guest co-hosts show up to the conversation. That's important to me. So I always take an opportunity to read their bio. And I'm going to do that at this time. Elaine Lynn Herring, a facilitator, author, and speaker. She works with organizations and individuals to build skills in communication, collaboration, and conflict management. She has worked on 6 continents and facilitated executive education at Harvard, Dartmouth, Tufts, UC Berkeley, and UCLA. She is the former advanced training director for the Harvard mediation program and a lecturer on law at Harvard Law School. She has worked with coal miners at BHP Billington, microfinance organizers in East Africa, mental health professionals in China, and senior leadership at the U.S. Department of Commerce. Her clients include American Express, Chevron, Google, Nike, Novartis, PayPal, Pixar, and the Red Cross, just to name a few. She is the author of the book that is amazing, and we're going to talk a lot about that today, but it is called Unlearning Silence: How to Speak Your Mind, Unleash Talent, and Live More Fully. And the publisher is Penguin, and that was actually released in 2024. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen now. This is the portion where I am able to bring into spotlight my guest co-host today. So I'm adding her now, and we're going to give her a chance to greet this audience in her own way. We do have a tradition here. And that tradition is that as you are thinking of how you want to greet this audience, we do encourage you to share something about yourself, Elaine, that we would not know from reading your bio, which we just did, or from looking at your LinkedIn profile. So welcome, friend. So glad you're here. And I want to give you a chance to greet this audience.
Oh, I am so honored to be here, and thank you for the warm welcome. It's funny hearing other people read your bio. And
I
there's a
agree.
part of me like, oof, like I'm
I know.
exhausted hearing it.
I know.
It's all true, and
It's all true.
no misinformation here. I think what often gets lost in that is I'm human.
Yeah.
And I very
Yes.
much feel like I'm just another human being on this planet trying to do my best, trying to do my part, trying to shape the world more into the one that I want it to be, in which each human being experiences belonging, dignity, justice, right? Gets to breathe, gets to live. And so, what's my part? And writing the book and showing up in these rooms, using the privilege that I have is just all part of that. Part of being human is having a story of my own. I am the youngest daughter of an immigrant family from Taiwan to the United States. I was raised in the Christian church, and maybe all of those things end up explaining why I focused on silence, right? Because of the youngest daughter against a patriarchal culture, to respect my elders meant to keep my mouth shut, right? To honor my parents means to
Yeah.
don't ask questions. To stay in this country means that you try to conform. And then I know we'll get into it, all the really damaging things that come from that. Even in the church, turn the other cheek, be the bigger person, and how that can go overboard in damaging ways. So going back to we're all human and delighted to get to be human beings together here today.
I just want to take a moment to pause as we take in the words, the beautiful words that you just shared, because I think it just deserves kind of a moment of letting it settle in. Um, yeah, there are many guest co-hosts that will tell me, please don't read my bio, please don't read my bio, because they have similar sentiments. It's embarrassing. I don't want to have to sit there and just, listen to you share all those things. And especially women. And most often I have more women on my podcast than I do on any other or genders. But the reason that I bring that up is because what you just shared is exactly how you show up in all spaces where I have seen you. So when I think about even what you share on social media, it doesn't matter that you have all these accolades behind your name. It doesn't matter that you are an author and a speaker and what you're connected to. I feel the humanity through every single post. And so it shows, it's very much a part of who you are. And I think that that's beautiful. And I love how you brought some cultural insights to this conversation as you were sharing a little bit about your story. Toki in our community, one of our podcast members, she placed into the chat, head down, work hard. And I do hear that a lot. Put your head down and just work hard, and maybe you're going to be recognized. Maybe the opportunities are going to come. Don't speak your mind. And so I love that you are leveraging your platform through your voice and your book to help break any type of stigmas that people may have about leveraging their voice and leveraging it fully to show up and to take up space. And so thank you very much for that. Okay, so one of the things that we like to do on the Intentional Conversations podcast is just hold space for some of the events that may have found their way into media that could be very much top of mind for those of us that care about humanity. And we are seeing so much strife right now in so many places, but one of which that has surfaced of late in a really delicate way that so many of us are feeling a need to stand in solidarity and to speak on it. And I want to hold space for that today. And that's what's happening right now in the UK with the protests and the riots. And so just to give you a chance, Elaine, to express what's coming up for you as you've been kind of watching and following the media, and how should the rest of us also be processing this from your perspective?
Yeah, it's so tender. All of it is so
Yeah,
tender because and we all move through the world in different ways,
yeah,
but the fear of walking down the street and not being safe is
yeah,
real. And
yeah.
you didn't do anything wrong.
Hmm.
It did not do anything wrong. It is someone's perception of you and saying you don't belong here. You are less than. I'm going to treat you as if you're not human. I mean, on what planet? How did we get here that we couldn't see each other as human? And
Yeah.
the second that has struck me is each of us showing up in our workplaces, in our communities, with our neighbors, seeing other people as neighbors really does matter, right? It
It
matters.
does.
Your manager says, hey, don't come into the office, and you don't have to ask for that.
Hmm. Yeah.
Aware. And you can if you want. You're preserving your
Yeah.
agency. I see you and I care about
Hmm.
your fundamental messages.
Yeah.
And that whether it is us on the streets, us texting people, it matters to know that you are not alone, to know that
Hmm.
everybody is what the headlines look like. Not everybody wants you kicked out of the country, fill in the blank. And so often when the world around us feels like it's burning, and it feels like, well, does it matter? What can I
Yeah.
possibly do that could matter? And each person who showed up in a crowd to say, that's not the real Britain that I know, each person
Hmm.
who texted, that matters to the other human being who is our neighbor. So let's
Yeah.
not forget the power that we have in actually being ourselves and showing up for each other.
Absolutely. Let's love our neighbors. Let's stand in solidarity with our neighbors. Let's support our neighbors. Let's realize the humanity in doing so. And I also love the practicality that you brought to the conversation of what people can do. Don't wait for an ask or for someone to have to request something. Go ahead and stand in support by initiating those conversations, letting them know that while you may not fully understand, it is something that you are aware of, and you want to be able to provide support in whatever ways that feel appropriate for those individuals. And so, yeah, I am with you on all of that. I think that we have to make sure that we're continuing to keep our eyes and ears open to pay attention to know what's going on, because if we don't, then it prevents us from having those opportunities to lean in and support where it could make all the difference in the world. Having our safety compromised is not something that I think any of us can withstand and tolerate for an extended period of time. So I am hopeful, I am prayerful. You and I both kind of aligned around our Christian faith that this will work itself out. But yes, definitely standing in solidarity with all of those who are being impacted by what we're seeing and what they could be experiencing, what we know many are experiencing in the UK. And then
Yeah,
let's
the
come back.
thing
Yeah.
to that, if I can, is
Yes.
in that moment, it is so easy to focus on our own reaction
Oh yeah.
of, oh
Yeah.
my God, not another. I can't take another.
Yeah.
And so often we change the subject from the initial person, in this case, our Muslim brothers and sisters,
Yes.
selves. And I know people have done that to me, right? It's like, oh, that's so horrible to read about the Asian hate. Okay, well, it's even worse to live it. Same thing,
Yes.
whatever the original group is or
Yeah.
individual, how do we center and love them and consider them rather than what is very human nature is to focus on our own reaction, our
Right.
own overwhelm, our own, oh, I can't deal with this, so I'm gonna go numb. And we can't
Yeah.
afford to go numb on behalf of each other because
Yeah.
you show up for each other. And if we're doing that for each other, then we each actually also get to rest. But
Yes.
it's such human nature to focus on ourselves in that instance when I just don't want us to change the subject.
Yeah, that is really good, Elaine, because I know that we also live in a society right now where so many people are concerned about self-care and well-being. And so in that regard, sometimes when we lean in and we're amplifying the messages of self-care and well-being, including myself, I'm a big advocate of that. Or we sometimes unintentionally giving people a license to go numb without really thinking about the implications of maybe just, deciding not to deal with it, and I think there's a balance of both. We each have to be well attuned to our bodies and our needs and know what kind of capacity we have right in those moments, but the ultimate goal is to get ourselves as healthy as possible so that we can get back out there and stand in support and solidarity in all the ways that you shared a moment ago. So thank you for bringing that to the conversation. I think that's really useful. So let's now move to the US. We know that this high stakes election season, and by the way, I make no qualms about being, and I'm going to kind of stand up a little bit, being Team Kamala. You can see that. That's my choice. And I'm happy to have one-to-one conversations with anyone that's interested about why that is my choice. But what I mostly am showing up to the conversation around the voting and the election season with this year is whoever you decide to vote for, I need you to vote. I need you to vote to exercise your voice. I know, Elaine, you're going to talk a little bit about the importance of a voice, but let's exercise our voice. Let's not think about this just as, VP, the P and the VP, but let's also think about our local elections, our state elections. There's so much that values our voice being lent to these really important stakeholders who we're identifying to help represent us. And so I want you all to vote. But thinking about the election, that's the conversation that we've been having for the past several weeks, just to touch on it, because it certainly is top of mind for all of us. Nothing significantly new this week. We do know that we have dates now where our VPs and our president candidates are going to be debating. We know that there continues to be a lot of hostility, a lot of, just mess. I don't know how else to word it, but mess that is, creating a lot of anxiety, a lot of anxiousness. And so I just want to continue to remind ourselves of consuming what we can in doses as we can, because we do need to be aware, but, just make sure that we aren't allowing this to really dampen our spirits, impact our energy, because we need all of us to maintain being grounded and centered so that we can vote and get through this election process. Elaine, what are you seeing or what are you hearing? And what's some ways in which you're asking people to show up when we know that there's a lot of hostility right now that could be impacting just the civility that should be shown to one another during this time?
Where I always go is the internal work. I mean, I
Uh,
when the announcement came out that Biden was stepping aside, and I was like, "All right, we gotta go. We only got a 97
yeah,
days. Okay, we'll sleep when we're dead." And talk about self-care, right? It's like everything that we were carrying as human beings before did not go away.
no.
The ask is just add on.
Yes.
We also, yes, it is important. It is urgent. We also need to stay sane, have something left of ourselves after November 5th. And so to contextualize it in that way, but I found myself just getting caught up in the frenzy of it, of
Yeah,
if on this Zoom call, then you're a bad person, right? There's so much judgment and so much weight.
yeah,
And can we not take that on? Not
yeah,
beat ourselves up for what we're not doing. And the grounding required for making it through all the noise and sifting through the noise, which to me is what is your purpose? What are your values? What do you care about? What future are you building toward? And particularly when you don't know where people stand, particularly if
yeah.
you feel like in my family where we haven't talked about politics, I just sort of hear the grapevine of who's on which side, and you're like, oh, I'm
Yeah.
not going to touch that. Oh, but it matters. And then there's all the, I flash back to being like a 13-year-old. And it's like,
Yeah.
oh, right, Dad, you don't have the same role in my life as you used to, but I still feel it whenever you open your mouth. And
Yeah.
what's that grounding of what is the future I care about? Whether it is my kid getting to go to school and not having to worry about mass shootings as much,
Yes.
whether it is immigration, pick your issue, or you just don't want the leaders of our country to be bullying people and for that to
Yeah.
be the language and how we show. What is it that matters to you? And can you hang on to that through
Yeah.
all of this? I think the other piece is just to notice the multiple layers of work we're all doing in addition to anything we might do around actually showing up in the polls and voting, which
Yeah.
is navigating all of the pain as women of
Mm.
color. We watch someone go through all, right? We've all experienced these dynamics in the workplaces and in our communities, and we're watching it happen very publicly. To me, Kamala seems, I mean, God bless her, she seems like she's up for it in ways where I'm like, I could not take that on. I don't
Right.
have
I
in me.
agree. Yeah.
But for us to just acknowledge that that work is work wherever we are in our healing journeys from the toxic behaviors we experienced. And also, I found myself listening into the White Dudes for Kamala call.
Yep.
And
Mhm.
I'm like, this is amazing. Some guy just said real women respect, or real men respect women. There's so
Mhm.
many layers of why that even has to be said. But there's
Yes.
also a tension of, do I dare let myself hope?
Yeah.
If,
Yeah.
if I'm open to the possibility, which it makes me vulnerable to the disappointment. And for me, I don't have a clear answer there so much as let's name it, because that's
Yeah.
another layer of what we're carrying, in addition to everything else.
Yeah. Yeah.
And to be intellectually honest with ourselves of, oh yeah, that's there. This is how I feel about it right now, or I'm not going to engage with it right now. But whatever it is, if you're exhausted, like bone tired, there are a lot of reasons why. And to not
Absolutely.
judgment on ourselves for get it together, suck it up, right? To
Yeah.
ask that as well.
Yeah. Yeah. So the inner work, I
Mm,
keep gravitating to that, which is how you started when you were responding to this question. We need to also think about what inner work is required on each of our part. And I don't want that to be missed. So I wanted to go back to it. And also this notion of hope, even
mm,
as vulnerable as hope could make us, because again, with the disappointment factor, the potential disappointment factor, I still think we have to lean into that hope and let it fuel us
mhm,
for this moment, right? Because without hope, what do we have, right? I feel like if we are going into this process feeling already defeated, then we're not going to be positioned to do the inner work, to go and vote, to show that level of human kindness and a sense of humanity to all. And so I think it's so important for us to, even as scary as it may feel, to hope for an ending that we feel like is the best ending, to not lose sight of that hope. And so I just wanted to also amplify that as well. I'm seeing some comments into the chat that's just reacting to a lot of what we've just shared. And Lisa shared a lot of misogyny against women. Yes, absolutely. And it is hard. It is hard to hear. It is hard to witness. We want to defend, but at the same time, we all have to be very present with our own emotions and our emotional capacity, because otherwise we could find ourselves doing some damage, right? And again, we need us all focused, grounded, healthy throughout this process. And so okay, so I want to talk about unlearning silence and how this has been such a really important message as part of your platform. So what inspired you to first and foremost to focus on communication, collaboration, conflict management as part of your career trajectory?
it was not my plan. I went to Harvard Law School intending to be a lawyer. And then I took a class called the Negotiation Workshop, in which we read Getting to Yes, sort of classic negotiation books, in which they said emotions are data, emotions are
Yeah.
valid. I'm like, what?
Oh, I love
That's
that. Emotion. Let's pause there. Emotions are data. That is big. I love that.
emotions are valid. They are data. They are part of the data set that we have to solve for. And that was not how I grew up. We swept everything under the rug. And surface peace is not really real peace. And so it was a really expensive tuition to pay to learn that. But it was oh, I mean, this seems useful. We can actually talk about
Yeah.
what a novel idea. How do we actually do that? So I really threw myself into it as a matter of my own personal development, right? What are the skill sets that we don't usually learn in school or don't pick up in our families of origin? And how can I actually learn to communicate more effectively? Which sent me down a road into a path of something called leadership development. I didn't know what it was. But in contrast to practicing law, helping other people communicate more effectively was um, energizing, was hopeful, right? And
Yeah.
work became other than blow each other up or sue each other, what can we do?
Yeah.
Turns out a whole lot. So why don't we do that?
Yeah.
What it right in terms of damage, in terms of effectiveness, in terms of clarifying misunderstandings, none of us are perfect. And being in our own silos, not talking about it means we're telling stories about each other that may or may not be accurate. And we don't
Right.
have a chance to course correct. We don't have a chance to influence the story you're telling about me. And so it's really been about opening up the channels of communication so that we see each other, we know each other, we hear each other. And as I taught then skills for negotiation, difficult conversations, feedback, all stuff out of the Harvard negotiation project, I noticed that some people still didn't negotiate. Some people still didn't have the difficult conversations or give feedback, no
Yes.
matter how much HR or their manager told them they should. And I thought, what gives?
What gives? Yeah.
And to me, what gives is many of us have learned to stay silent. And I
Mhm.
know people are like, no, I was always the vocal one. Yes, and in what ways might you have had to censor yourself or leave parts of your identity out of the workplace because they were unacceptable? From the way that you think to the way that you communicate to the way that you dress. I mean, there's so much pressure to conform and to mimic, and such a centering of whiteness in our workplaces. Um, and and we didn't make it up. It's not like I just thought, let me bite my tongue out of nowhere. It people around us, even well-intentioned leaders, by the way they continue to, they say, hey, I want to hear what you really think, and then you share it, and then you're no longer invited to the meeting. Or you have to deal with their defensiveness, right? We each contribute to how other people feel silenced or are silenced. And of course, it's baked into our systems and processes as well. So to me, it was coming from a place of frustration. Everyone just says, speak up, speak your mind. I love Nike. This is not a just do it situation, right?
Yeah.
And you
Yeah.
just do it is a you go fix yourself, have more confidence, have more courage, whatever training you need, and then maybe we can promote you. Maybe we will hear you. Maybe we will honor your dignity as a human being. Maybe. But we're also often going to change the goalpost because of dominant norms and dominant culture. So I at least wanted us to answer a more honest question, which is
Mhm.
what role does silence play in our lives and on our teams?
What role does silence play in our lives and on our teams? I think that's such an important question for each of us to interrogate. And I was taking notes. That's why my head went down so many times because I show up to these conversations, just so all of you know, learning as well, right? So this is good. I just want to kind of process a little bit of what's coming up for me. The first thing is, the whole fix yourself. I think that I'm so glad that you amplified that because that is the approach that a lot of leaders and organizations will take. This is your problem. You go deal with it and fix yourself. And we know that in order to really navigate this in an effective way to where change can occur, we have to also look at the systems, the culture, the way in which we are skilling our leaders to be effective leaders and managers, right? So that's really critical. I also am keenly aware, and I know that you speak about this a lot too, that there are certain communities and populations of people that are more prone to silencing their voice because of cultural issues or because of, again, the marginalization and the systems of oppression that they have experienced. And so I love that you highlighted the need for us to be cognizant when people are just conforming. It's a mainstream way of thinking, dominant culture, instead of showing up authentically as they desire to, because again, that's also where the beauty of diversity in spaces can realize the good results that we often hear about in research. Um, Naming hard things. I wrote that down as well because I'm really big, and my team can tell you this. I'm really big on naming hard things. One of our core values at NWC is constructive candor. And there's a way to do that, but we have to make sure that we are creating an environment where we can be constructive and useful in our feedback, and naming some hard things, because otherwise we're not able to allow people to show up at their best if they're grappling with, I'm dealing with something that I can't even communicate that is a problem for me. So, it's just going to be a vicious cycle of finding myself in the same place over and over again. So this upskilling around communications, I am definitely aligned with you, Elaine. And I just want to point out, and I know that you agree with this, that it encompasses so much more than just our speech and our voice. It encompasses how well are we listening, how well are we, paying attention to the feel words and the tone of others. I mean, all those different things to fully understand. I talk often about the difference between responding and reacting. I mean, there's a difference there. I mean, so communication, it shows up across so many different ways. And I just want to make sure that as we're talking about negotiations and conflict management and collaboration and upskilling around communication, that we're thinking about it in the broad scope of really how it exists. And so, I don't know, it was just so much that you shared that I wanted to kind of process, at least how I was thinking about it. Is there more that you'd like to add? Yeah.
Yeah, I often think about voice not just as the words we say in a meeting,
Oh,
but
yeah.
move through the world.
Yeah.
Vo-
Yeah.
Voice is not just the words we say in a meeting, voice is how we move through the world. That takes us a little
Yeah.
bit back to the election, right? Of
Mhm.
yes, it's cast a ballot vote, but it's also, are you being kind to your neighbor? What is it? How do we show up for each other? And particularly when it seems like in meetings, it's like it's the Babel hypothesis of leadership. And maybe we should drop the research around this. Most 80% of our work happens in teams. In a 6-person meeting, about 80% of the conversation is dominated by 2 people.
Yeah.
And often, right, we code leadership or leadership potential based on the frequency, the quantity of speech rather than the quality of speech. So it's there.
Right?
And that's the
Yeah.
self-conscious, right? This is what a leader looks like. And so there's pressure for each of us to look and sound like that, except that's not us. So to
Right.
create spaces where we support each other's voices is really to broaden or open up our imagination to what different leadership could look like, right? It doesn't have to sound
Mhm.
like 3 succinct bullet points with no ums and just the right amount of emotion to show that you care, but not too much, particularly if you're female or present as female, that you lose
Yes.
credibility. Right? That's such a narrow. Why limit ourselves to the ideas that can come out in that form versus what someone puts in Slack? Because
Right.
more effectively by typing than by talking. Why is that any less than?
Right.
That's
Exactly.
the idea. And so
Exactly.
the contribution of how are we receiving each other,
Yeah.
that that to me is a responsibility we all hold, in addition to how do I want to move through the world. You said something really interesting to me, which is how to use our voice in the way that we desire or bring forth the ideas in a way that we desire. I'd actually take it a step further back, which is if we spend our lives channeling other people's voices, solving other people's problems, right? It's not what do I think, it's what does my mother think? What does my manager think? What does the company want
Mhm.
me to say? We actually lose the sense that we could show up and engage with agency. And that's a
Yeah.
really technical way of saying, like, who am I?
Hmm.
Do I have a voice that is actually my own? And that was very much my own journey, having spent a lot of time in white spaces trying to imitate the people around me who were successful, who happened to be white.
Hmm.
I actually didn't think I had a voice.
Yeah.
because I thought my only worth came from performing the roles given to me. And so if anyone else is also in that position, again, we go back to inner work and we keep going back to that inner work. I would start by, even as you're listening to this podcast or you're reading an article, whatever it is, you're existing in the world, ask yourself two questions. What do I think? Right? Just what do I think? Not what am I supposed to think? Not
What
the
do I
should.
think?
What do I think? And what do I need? Your mention of our bodies and being attuned to what we need. There's so much of, oh, I should want that. I should need this versus no, what do I actually need? So what do I think? What do I need? Starts to recultivate that sense of self that can so get lost as we're moving through the world.
This is so, so good, Elaine. I just want to pause for a second to think about that question of what do I think? We spend so much time just wanting to engage that we are quick to just start speaking without even
Because we're
considering,
supposed
well,
to
I know,
at
yeah,
work.
how do I
Otherwise you don't
really
get hurt.
feel? Yes, how do I really feel? What do I really think? And in absence of trying to align with what you feel like people want to hear. And that is hard. And I think it's something that we do, that we're conditioned to do, and we don't even realize that we do it as often as we do.
Yeah.
And so I just love this notion of let's pause and let's just really ask ourselves, what do I think about what I'm hearing and what I'm being exposed to? And then giving ourselves that agency, as you mentioned, to be able to follow that thought and express it, even if it goes against what everyone else could be thinking. I love this idea of reimagining voice as how we show up to the world in general, right? Not just our verbal communication, but how we show up. I love when you said, am I being kind to my neighbor? How am I interacting with others? I think that's really important. And I too have noticed that our society tends to value and favor extroversion over introversion. And so you're bringing to the conversation, how well are we not discounting people who aren't, from a quantities perspective, speaking frequently, but yet and still they're being slow to speak. But when they do show up and they do speak, it is substantive, it is useful, it is well thought out. And I think that there's something to be said for, again, as we talk about just diversity in all forms and dimensions, how are we showing up for our introverted, friends, right?
Mhm.
And making sure that some of the ways in which they could be perceived is not preventing opportunities from them to also be able to have those opportunities of upward mobility and such. And so lots of great things that are happening into the chat. Anthony said the pause technique to kind of amplify that. He also mentioned earlier that body language is something that we, of course, is part of our communication. Toki says language is truly a living system. Thoughtful language builds trust, protects safe spaces, and makes room for respectful dialogue. I love that. Yes, I love that. Okay, so this is the point in time where I let our audience know that we're going to be shifting, and we will give you an opportunity, should you desire, to engage in our conversations today. Maybe you have a question that's percolating or some curiosities, and you would like to present your question live. You can do so. You'll use the raise hand feature if you're part of our Zoom community. That lets me know that you're willing for me to invite you to unmute yourself and share it. If your camera is on, I will add you to the spotlight. If you just want to place your questions or comments into the chat, we welcome that as well, and I will try to get to as many of those as possible. If you're watching LinkedIn Live, not to worry, we have not forgotten about you. We value your presence here today as well. Go and share your questions into the comment section. Our team is watching that and bringing it over into this conversation in our chat so that we can address that as well. So while you're percolating, I'm going to go to the next question, and then I'll come back to see if we have any hands raised or questions into the chat. And so I shared in the beginning that you have worked on 6 different continents, and I would imagine that that has definitely shaped your approach to conflict resolution, to upskilling around communication. Talk to us a little bit about that experience and how it does find its way into how you coach and guide and inform the work that you do.
Yeah. I mean, where we live is just one dimension,
Yeah,
right? And it's not to discount it, but it's to say none of us are monoliths. No
right.
one on the Australian continent or next door in New Zealand is the same. But what is really interesting about having worked on the different continents is that this reality that people are people.
Yeah,
People
people are
are
people.
people. And that is actually true working in levels of seniority too. right? The
Hmm.
CEO to whoever might just have joined the company, whether you're early in tenure, early in your career, we're still people, which means we want to be heard, we want to be seen, we want to be treated with dignity. I mean, this is where we started. It is our common humanity that binds us. And if we can keep showing up for each other as human, we're a lot further along than maybe our interactions day to day might suggest. And so there is a commonality in, everybody is a daughter, or, you have parents, you
Yeah.
have friends,
Yeah.
you get annoyed by your coworkers. That's just human.
Yeah.
Rather than feel like, oh, I'm the only one, everyone else seems like they can handle it, I've got to keep it to myself. There is a, yeah, this is typical
Yeah.
human beings coexisting with each other, trying to figure it out. And let's keep figuring out what might help. And, it's an interesting piece of when I am working with a group, I'm not thinking of myself as the expert, even if my credentials might suggest it, or my colleagues might present themselves as the expert. I'm
Hmm.
thinking, I'm very much on this journey together.
Mm.
And I've thought
Mm.
a lot about a lot of these things, and I've seen patterns across geography and industry. And I'm just trying to figure it out as well. So let's do that together, right? I think so
Yeah.
often when we think about leadership development, it's people who are experts who have written books to then tell us what to do. And number one, I would interrogate, what are you reading? What are you consuming? Who wrote
Mm.
it? What lens of the world do they have? Because that contributes to the, oh, I'm the problem, right? Best practice says this. Why can't I do it? Or why doesn't it work for me? I must be doing it wrong. Versus that
Yeah.
advice was never meant
Yeah.
for you. That actually works for a very specific subset of people. And second, what are we going to keep trying, and how do we do it together? What I love about this community and WC is we're in community together, figuring it out together,
Yeah.
because that
Yeah.
social isolation that results from silence, of not connecting, not talking about it, does really a lot of damage internally, right? Thinking that we're the
Mm.
ones. I love
Yeah.
Eric's addition in the chat of, we can disagree and still love one another.
Yeah.
Yeah, a couple of you mentioned, Nika, um, if you see it differently, to be able to add that to the conversation. It can feel really intimidating,
Yeah.
particularly with power
Absolutely.
dynamics, particularly if you're already more othered. One of my favorite phrases, though, to get us into that conversation is, from where I sit. From
Yes.
where I
Where
sit
I
as
sit.
right? And that could be from where I sit in sales. What do things look like in engineering? But let me own that my perspective is legitimate. It's
Yeah.
limited and legitimate. Yours is also limited and legitimate, but because you're the CEO, so often we just think of it as legitimate, versus actually you have a specific vantage point of the world. So
Yes.
from where I sit, it doesn't make sense. Help me understand
Yeah.
how it makes sense from where you sit.
Yes, yes. I want to share that tool into the chat so if someone could just place into the chat from where I sit. I think having language and having tools that we could pull from our toolbox in the moment is really useful. One of the phrases that I often use, which is akin to from where I sit, is, that hasn't been my experience.
Mhm.
So there's different ways to respectfully challenge the status quo and to get people to a place where they can interrogate their thinking and their thoughts. And I love again having those tools and language that we could use. One of the other things, and I see your hand, Anthony. I'm coming to you next. Thanks so much for being here. One of the things that you said is about when you are working with individuals that you make it clear that we're on this journey together. And I can only imagine that that is part of what makes you so effective because people need to feel as though I'm not alone. This is not this person who is coaching me and guiding me has it all together and they never make those mistakes and never fall into the trap of not being able to fully use their voice the way they need to. And there's some comfort in that, right?
Mhm.
Because we don't feel like we have to be perfect at it. We're just after progress, not perfection, but progress. And the last thing that I heard you say, where you were talking about our similarities, right? I think that we do focus so much on our differences, and differences, they shouldn't, but sometimes they can divide. And so the message for me, or the takeaway, was let's also make sure that we're finding those entry points of commonality in order to align around similarities, which can build those bridges, which helps us to build that trust, build those connections, and lean deeper into, again, this whole aspect of humanity. So I love this conversation so much. Okay, Anthony, I'm going to bring you into the spotlight. Thanks for being here today. Please feel free to unmute yourself and share your question or comments. We can't hear you. You're on mute. Has a hands up in the air. We're going to wait for you, Anthony. And by the way, while we're waiting for Anthony to get his volume situated, I do also want to thank the individual that placed into the chat the wise words of James Baldwin. Actually, that was you, Anthony. So
Yeah.
thank you, thank you, thank you. Okay,
Thank you.
I
Yeah,
can hear you
sorry, I
now.
had my mute on. So good to
That's
see you
totally
again, Nika.
fine.
Can you hear me okay?
Yes, we can. Thank
Yeah,
you. Thanks for being
so good
here.
to see you as always. Thank you for doing this. Happy Friday. Yeah,
Happy Friday.
I posted that because it's one of my favorite quotes, and I'm curious to get anybody's thoughts on this call because we talk a lot about emotional IQ and self-care and pause technique. And I think one of the challenges that I know I have as a practitioner, trying to separate being a practitioner from being a Black man in the space today is I believe we can disagree with each other, but there becomes a point where there's lines being crossed and lines of respect, and deep lines of isms. We both know that the racisms and sexisms are the two biggest, but I'm curious how you all as practitioners are handling that in your day-to-day space. Let's forget all of us being practitioners, but how are you handling that at the grocery store or on social media or at the family cookout? The everyday lives that we all leave outside of this work. How are you all dealing with that? I'm just curious because that's a really difficult thing I know right now.
Yeah. I'll go first, and then Nika, you want to pick
Yeah,
up after?
absolutely.
Dr. Pooja Lakshman wrote a book called Real Self-Care, and it's not crystals and bubble baths is the subtitle. And my biggest takeaway from that book is boundaries are not co-created.
Yeah. Yeah.
Boundaries are not co-created, and that strikes for me because I'm so often looking to consider other people. And so are you okay if I set this boundary of not engaging with you on that topic? Except I don't need to have your buy-in to create that, to identify, create, and maintain that boundary for myself. I think what I love this quote of we can disagree and still love each other, and there's nuance between liking and loving someone.
Mhm.
And what feels really hard these days is that we're not disagreeing on tax policy. It feels like your perspective of how you see the world is getting to the core of my identity. You don't want me to exist in this country or in this community. And
Yeah.
that's not a disagreement. That is where the attack, that it's not psychologically or physically safe to be, comes in, which leads me
Right.
to things. What are the boundaries that keep me alive, healthy, safe? That I don't need to consult with other people on, but I need to identify for myself and be able to hold for myself. And in what ways can I show up for you as a Black man in my Asian female body? That means that we can maintain that boundary for you. And the work that we're talking about
Mm-hmm.
of shifting mindset still happens.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that was so beautifully stated. I don't have much to add to it, Elaine. Someone shared in the comments that boundaries are not for others, they're for us. And so I think also remembering that in those moments allows us to be centered and grounded to determine how do I want to show up now in this moment, remind myself of my boundaries, right? And then also just thinking about what's the ultimate goal here? Because sometimes we get so impacted by the now that we forget what is the ultimate goal here? And I talk often about how when aggression meets aggression, conversations, dialogue end, we don't have the ability to rely on rapport to be able to change hearts and minds and to share perspectives because, it's gotten to a place where people have checked out. And so what is our goal here? And I think just being self-aware of how in which we are showing up in that moment helps us to also be grounded around our own boundaries and to respond in a way that we won't regret later. So thank you so much, Anthony, for being here. I appreciate the question.
Absolutely.
Okay, so I'm looking to see if we have anyone else that would like to present a question or a comment. If not, I have so many, and I know we're running out of time as well. Okay, I'm not seeing any hands up right now, so I'm going to go to my next question. And this is where I want to talk a little bit about your book and the final moments that we have left. So it's called Unlearning Silence. And I'm going to want you to share some common ways that people can learn to stay silent, particularly in professional settings, or not to stay silent, right, in professional settings. And we're also, while you're sharing that, Elaine, we're going to place a link to your book into the chat. I do encourage everyone to get you a copy. It's a really rich read. I was so excited because it was soon after maybe you released your book, Elaine. I was traveling and I saw it in an airport. And I know how giddy I get when someone sends me pictures of my book in an airport. So I was like, yay! And I tagged you. And that was one of the moments that we were able to connect. But nonetheless, it is a great resource. And I would love for you to share more about what are get the book now. We're not going to give you everything, but I do want to invite Elaine to share some practices for how people can learn to this whole issue around silence and to make sure that they're using their voice appropriately. So share with us, Elaine.
Yeah, I want to be clear that unlearning silence does not mean saying everything everywhere to everyone all the time.
Thank you for that.
The
I
world
think
is
that's
too
important.
noisy for that. My favorite chapter is chapter 3, When Silence Makes Sense. To acknowledge that silence can be strategic. Silence is part of our tool set in terms of
Yes.
and self-preservation. And so to acknowledge that because there can be so much judgment these days, silence is violence, silence is complicity. What does my silence mean? Am I clear about it? And does it serve, as you said, my goals?
Yeah. Right.
The difference
Right.
between silence that is additive and strategic or silence that is oppressive is agency. Is it silence that you're choosing for yourself because you're biting your tongue for now, but you actually think they're not going to hear it because it's gotten so heated, but I'm going to go have the conversation with these two other stakeholders and we're going to get to the goal a different way? Or is silence the only choice?
Yeah.
Because others
Yeah.
would be costly for you. My big invitation would be to just notice, wrestle with, in what ways have I learned silence? In what ways have I created these habits, adopted these habits, the assumptions of who gets to speak, whether my voice is worthy or worthwhile? And also, depending on how you're situated, in what ways might you unintentionally silence other people? Our conversation about mediums, about typing, about texting, one of the things that we know about workplaces and even families is that if we aren't actively designing the way that we communicate, we default to the habits and preferences of the people with the most power.
Right.
We conform to dominant culture. We have that live meeting at 9 a.m., which is really hard for parents because they're just coming in without realizing the impact. Does it have to be 9 a.m.? The last thing I'll add to is also our different processing styles.
Yes.
Some people process best by talking it out. And so let's talk it out. And they're like, pick up the phone, let's talk it out. And some of us, maybe you've had this experience, you're in a meeting, you can't quite figure out what to say. 20 minutes after the meeting, you're like, that's what I wanted to say.
Yeah.
Often considered a weakness. And we're told that we need to be quicker on our feet and more responsive. And that to me is not a weakness. It is simply a difference in wiring. And so what do we do about that? We redesign the way that we communicate. So you still have your real-time meeting for the real-time processors. Instead of making a call in that meeting, whoever's owning the meeting says, everyone sleep on it because you planned ahead of time so you can afford to sleep on it. Sleep on it. As you post-process, share whatever comes up by, clicking reply all on the email thread. You've normalized that there are different ways of showing up, different ways of thinking, and made clear, okay, if you want to say something, share it. This is normal. Reply all. So you're not guessing, do I reply all? Do I put it in Slack? Do I have to call them? Do I just, you get overwhelmed
Right.
by choices. So see I don't think any of us intend to silence each other, but based on our actions, our choices, we do incline each other towards silence by making it harder or easier for someone to show up as they are. There's so much more we could go into, but hopefully
Oh,
we'll maybe that's a useful bite-sized piece.
oh, we need so much more time. I think what's coming up for me is just how multi-layered this whole notion of silence, unlearning silence is. I think that is so interesting, and there's a lot to be said for the processing aspect of it. People do process differently, so giving them tools or ability to be able to circle back later, or even sending information in advance so they can spend time with it and not having to just in the moment, rely on you know whatever kind of processing that they need. Um, this has been so good, and I so appreciate you being here with us. Unfortunately, we are out of time, and I want to talk more. I want to talk more about how we silence each other because I think that that's a lot more to unpack with that because we don't even realize that's happening. But in the interim, I'm going to again encourage you all to get Elaine's book and unlearning silence. Again, we've placed the link into the chat. I hope that you will check that out. And we're definitely going to have to find an opportunity to bring you back. By the way, Elaine is joining us from the West Coast, so it was super, super early for her today, and we are even more grateful because of that. But I have really enjoyed having you. I want to thank this community as well for showing up and being part of our podcast. I want to give you the last final 60 seconds to close us out in whatever way that feels appropriate. So turning it over to you, Elaine.
Mm, thank you for having me. I mean, what's coming up for me is, and I may be saying it to myself as much as to everyone here, we are enough. We are
Mm-hmm.
enough as we are. There are so many messages that tell us that we're wrong in these different ways. And so there's all these layers of who am I really? And that we need to earn respect, that we need to, hustle hard enough to then be able to rest. What if we are enough as we are? And to start with the internal work of not just liking ourselves, that Anthony, you can work on that, but loving ourselves as a way to then be able to show up for each other.
Mm-hmm.
So thank you
100%.
for letting me be part of intentional conversations.
Beautiful way to end. We are enough. Thank you all so much. Have a safe and healthy weekend. We hope to see you back for another episode of Intentional Conversations podcast next Friday. Thank you.